Hey everybody, Jamie here from Flow Genome Project on Freaky Friday, number however many. Great to see you all. This has been a wild ass and busy week. Turn on your sound, all that good stuff. If you want to hang out and rap for a while, probably 15, 20 minutes or until my phone dies, whichever comes first. So today we are here to talk about state-sanctioned states of consciousness, or, the idea, you may have heard the phrase, the victors write the history, they also write the prescriptions. And it's really important to understand this is kind of content we go into some great detail in our new book, which came out this week and is killing it, by the way, Stealing Fire. So anybody that's interested, by all means, go there. It's debuted top 50 on Amazon. It's got all kinds of press, from Entrepreneur Magazine to LinkedIn Weekends to NBC to a big, huge 2,400-word excerpt that's showing up in the New York Post, of all places, Rupert Murdoch's paper. And we were on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange this week. We did a sold-out talk with Jason Silva for our launch party in New York at the Deepak Chopra Center. So amazing good week. We've just been crazy busy. Some of you guys have been following it. Thank you for your love and support. If you've already grabbed a copy, a lot of people are finishing it up right now, having their minds heartily blown. So all of that is incredibly gratifying after a couple of years. But I wanted to actually talk about one of the main themes of the book, because it specifically showed up in the news cycle this week. So that's what Freaky Fridays are. They're a chance for me to go even further off the res than you might normally find me, and riff freely on it. So yesterday, Melissa McSpicer, I think, the White House press secretary, whatever his name is, I don't quite remember, came out and explicitly said that the federal government, under new Attorney General Jeff Sessions, was going to be enforcing federal marijuana laws, which, if you think about it, coming from the nominal conservative point of view, which is all about states' rights, right? The idea of the federal government bigfooting the will of the people at the state level is anomalous, to say the least. And yet, here's what was so fascinating about his argument. He said, we're really concerned and mindful of the people suffering from pain, et cetera, and medical marijuana being one thing, but we draw a line at recreational. And here's just the fascinating thing, and this is kind of the whole premise, because this is, by the way, this is not a political rant. This is an actual, rhetorical, historical perspective and analysis, which is, he said, he thinks is incredible with the opioid epidemic we're facing. He believes it's incredible. In fact, I'll even read his exact quote, because I pulled it up. I think that when you see something like the opioid addiction crisis blossoming in so many states around this country, the last thing we should be doing is encouraging people. You're like, okay, so let's check this out. So there is really strong evidence over the last 12 to 24 months that in every state where there is legalization, whether it's medical or recreational, that opioid use and abuse goes down, because basically people have more tools at their disposal, and they're less addictive. So in fact, on an evidentiary public health basis, incidences and ease of access to cannabinoids, especially CBDs and any of the strains that are non-psychoactive but actually pain alleviating or anti-inflammatories, have actually resulted in a decrease in opioid addiction and abuse, not an increase. So you're like, so what's going on here? And we think, and then to conflate the use of opioids with the sort of gateway drug or slippery slope mentality is clearly a moralist argument dressed in policy clothing. And that's what we see time and time again. In fact, let me just see, there's some awesome people just shared. Lucas Cohen, all right, you guys have all jumped in with your reactions. I'm psyched. Keep making comments and anything else. We will come to those in a sec. And so what we're seeing is a moralist argument that is philosophically inconsistent with general states' rights conservative viewpoints, and yet it is weighing in on a substance that has and by the way, there was also another article this week showing some potential downsides of sustained cannabis use. They always do it with like total stoners. You get blazed 3 times a day. You're like, okay, whatever, guys, but let's see what shows up. And it does apparently constrict blood flow to the hippocampus and may contribute to early onset Alzheimer's. So as everybody's in the legalize it, recreational, everything's good, CBD does everything, and cures your dog and teaches them to read, there is going to be better evidence as more people are studying with better studies, and it will be clear that cannabinoids are not a free pass, right? Then that's not the issue. The question is how do they compare to other state-sanctioned substances? In the specific instance, since Sessions and Spicer just brought it up, let's take a look at the opioids. Right, and if anybody followed, a month ago, there was a really in-depth, hard-hitting piece by a West Virginia Gazette reporter, I believe. Maybe the only people still doing straight up journalism these days are people in their own small towns. But he basically tracked all of the opioid use through West Virginia. Where were the pharmacies coming? How was it getting dispensed? It wasn't the Walgreens and the CVS's, thank God. It was small mom and pop pharmacies who were ordering gajillions of pills of OxyContin, these other things. I mean, literally like enough to be like for 400 pills per year per person for every man, woman, and child in a given county. And here's the thing. The DEA turned a blind eye, and so did the pharmaceutical companies prescribing and selling this stuff. Right? And we know that this opioid epidemic has decimated rural America. Right? We also know that these companies are now taking a page out of Big Pharma's playbook, Big Tobacco's playbook, and as soon as it gets squelched, like deny, obfuscate, pretend they don't know, say more research is needed, and then finally when public opinion breaks and or some big whistleblower lawsuit shuts them the hell down for egregious and criminal business practice, they just ship the same playbook overseas. And that's exactly what's happening for Big Pharma, going out and rolling out in Mexico, in Southeast Asia, and all these other countries. And it's happening right now, like in the last 6 to 9 months, that doesn't have all of the you can't pay to play with the doctors anymore. Like, how the U.S. cranked down on all Big Pharma just having the doctors in their back pocket, taking them to golfing resorts and all that kind of stuff. Well, all those regulations don't exist in other countries. And the same exact pharmaceutical companies that have basically got whatever it is, 10%, 5%, some obscene proportion of the American population into, and some, a smaller subset hooked and lives ruined by OxyContin, fentanyl, all these other things, are now just replicating it around the world. So as their market share drops in this country, right, they're just ramping up in the places that people don't know better. So that's the situation. And yet, out of a world of opportunities, we now have an Attorney General and a White House that is going to go against conservative political doctrine of letting states decide, right, to say, no, we're going to monkey with this, and we're going to monkey with this specifically on cannabinoids, despite the evidence, right, and we're going to just give a free pass / turn a blind eye to the big pharma companies that are decimating and ravaging our communities, right? So that's the notion of state-sanctioned states of consciousness. And we talk about this in the book a little bit, which is Dr. David Nutt, who is the Minister of Drug Harms in the United Kingdom. And I've mentioned this before in a different Freaky Friday, but it was fundamentally, he published the list, stack-ranked the list of 20, the 20 most common drugs and drug uses in UK society, and ranked them on drug harm. And alcohol was number 1, heroin was number 2, tobacco was number 6, cannabis was number 8, ecstasy was number 17, and I think psilocybin and LSD were 19 and 20. And he got fired for publishing that list. Fired, even though his results were published in The Lancet, pretty much one of the top 3 most respected medical journals on the planet. So you realize, this is really curious. This is really curious and counterfactual. There is a disproportionate bias. And in fact, Jeff Sessions, our new Attorney General, infamously said, I was fine with the KKK until I learned they smoked marijuana, and you're like, oh my God. So what we're seeing is asymmetrical valuation and prosecution of substances that do or do not agree with governing state systems. And early examples, another goofy one was in Prohibition America, right in the 1920s. There was such a backlash against alcohol. And, arguably rightly so, ethanol is just a slow poisoner. That's the intoxication you get on a given night after 3 drinks. If you continue doing that over a sustained period of months and years, you die. You drink too much of it, you feel sick and puke and your head splits the next day. Ethanol is just marginal poisoning. It's not really that different than like kids in Sao Paulo huffing glue. You're like, why do those poor little street urchins huff glue? That seems so ass backwards and destructive. And you're like, yep, and we do it every night and we call it happy hour. So in Prohibition 1920s America, they outlawed, this is so crazy, like Johnny Appleseed, that you were not allowed to grow apple trees. They used to chop down all the apple trees on the off chance that those apples could then be fermented and made into cider, right? But you could go straight down to your local pharmacy in the 20s and get banging cannabis and opioids. Like you can get opium / laudanum, just drink it down straight up, off the, from over the counter, no prescription needed. And the same with cannabinoids. But you couldn't even grow an apple, right? So just an interesting thought as to what we're seeing, this week in particular. Note the moralist arguments wrapped in public health and policy, contravened by the actual evidentiary basis in comparing and contrasting. So, but and to be super clear, this is not blanket advocacy of any one substance. It's simply to say, look how much of a gap there is between those that are supported and endorsed, and those which are repressed and vilified. And quite often, in fact, fairly consistently, Michael Pollan, the great writer and sort of commentator on food and everything else, he said, curiously, right, most cultures have one plant or compound they tend to fetishize, right, and wrap in all of their rituals and customs. I mean, for us, it is alcohol, it's raising a glass, it's toasting, it's Holy Communion, it's all those things. But they also persecute or prosecute others, and the differences don't always make that much sense. Right. So with that, I mean, hell, I could go off and talk in much more detail about it. But I would encourage you guys to think, well, what's my relationship to different compounds? Which ones are endorsed, right? Which ones are prosecuted or vilified? And what's my own inner meaning making around that? What is the information that my experience of those things discloses or does not? What are the accumulated costs and benefits? Does it make me healthier, wealthier, wiser, kinder, better, happier? Are there downstream social costs, right? Are there costs to my family or costs to my job? Are there benefits? And are there benefits that I've experienced but may or may not be widely held or understood? And so the hashtags here were fundamentally, cognitive liberty, right? Fundamentally, what takes place between our ears should be none of anybody else's goddamn business. Right, and consenting adults having the ability to alter our consciousness at will, right? Arguably, I mean, outside operating, motor vehicles, which clearly crosses other people's boundaries, right, of care and harm and safety, and our civic responsibilities. But what's happening between my ears should be nobody else's business. And we are, in fact, entering, and this is not kind of like tinfoil hatty, but we write about it in some detail in the book, which is. We are now entering an age where your neurotransmitters are reliably measurable. So if you're and you could be stopped for sort of roadside sobriety or anything else, or you can probably just scan through phones. I mean, and these aren't made up. These are all actually literal tests. These are actual products that are in development. This is kind of like what's next in the next 18 months minimum, where you get a neurotransmitter profile. And it could be, excuse me, sir, you seem abnormally high in serotonin and oxytocin. Please step out of the car and give me a hug, right? We won't know. But the ability to say that regardless of the mechanisms that prompt or prime our interior neurochemistry, whether it's meditating, whether it's breath work, whether it's a yogic or martial practice, or whether it's a compound I ingest that metabolizes or doesn't, right? It's the neurochemistry inside ourselves, the endopharmacology, the inside pharmacology, that ultimately is the shooting match. And that's true for Prozac, right? Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So it just prevents the serotonin from going back up into our system. So more of it rattles around longer and shifts our mood over time. Or, right, whether it's an MDMA, which actually produces it just triggers a release of serotonin, or LSD and psilocybin, which interact with different serotonin receptor sites, right? Moral of the story, I'm sure you can figure this out by now, is serotonin, right? So getting conversant with what are all the different mechanisms by which, and then of course 90% of our serotonin is manufactured in our gut and our microbiome. Right, so you're like, wow, I could be eating yogurt with active cultures that might affect the growth or production of serotonin, a neurotransmitter, which I'm actually developing in my gut and my microbiome, which may or may not, and the research is still out on this one as to whether that 90% of serotonin derived in our gut actually makes it up and crosses the blood-brain barrier, but we'll see. The questions could be, wow, man, I absolutely have the ability to tune my nervous system, tune my neurochemistry, shape directly my consciousness by a variety of mechanisms, both exogenous, outside myself, and endogenous. And the exogenous ones, somewhat like training wheels, or just easiest way to, from point A to point B, include chemical compounds. And so as we start seeing state-sanctioned states of consciousness, right, affecting and impacting both laws and policies, civic society, our own personal choices, right, it's important to understand, this is what's happening under the hood. Quite often public health arguments are made, but there's often a crypto-Puritan moralistic judgment, right? I mean, even think about the number of folks that are, the number of pharma companies that are looking to manufacture synthetic cannabinoids as they rush into this space, but they're working like hell to get any quote-unquote high out of it. And you're like, well, wait a second. If I take a painkiller that my doctor gave me for my knee surgery, right, I feel looped. I feel like puking. I feel horrendous and woozy and not connected and not, like, I mean, I personally, it just does not track for me. But that was fine. That had all kinds of side effects, right? If I take Prozac, all kinds of side effects, right? Ranging from impotence to hair loss to depression to what they call brain zaps when you try and go off the stuff. And yet, right, we're not going after those things, and we're not saying enough is enough. These are, or Adderall and Ritalin, the number of kids that are basically growing up with high industrial strength amphetamines coursing through their system from the ages of 6 to 16 or 26. And you're like that. I mean, the Swiss Committee on Bioethics weighed in and said that they believe that sort of, non-elective, non-consensual, meaning if you're, a 6-year-old, you're probably not super informed and consenting, non-elective deployment of amphetamine-based attention aids, which is the Ritalin and the Adderalls, right, there's one methyl group difference between Ritalin and Adderall and crystal meth. So we're putting our kids on, not crystal meth, but pretty damn close. Dextroamphetamine is the salt that they all break down into. And the Swiss bioethics community said that is actually a crime and civil liberty. So if you guys can still hear, I just kind of blipped in and out on the Wi-Fi there. But those are the invitations. Is for you guys to think about it, pay attention to it, and understand cognitive literacy as well as this notion of occupy our minds. What goes on, the information we receive, the methods by which we do that and get there, right, are hours and hours alone. Let's be responsible, let's be respectful, and let's just say no with a K. All right, guys, that's it. You're awesome. Thank you so much. If you want to check out more, the book is stealingfirebook.com. It is killing it right now, so we couldn't be more grateful. You guys are absolutely rad. There are tons more ridiculous stories in there, ranging from Navy SEALs to kinky sex meditators to digital artists to, my God, Google and Burning Man and pretty much everything under the sun, all jammed together in one ridiculous book. So thank you guys. It's been a pleasure to get to connect again. It was a whirlwind week, and we will love you and leave you. Have an absolutely awesome weekend, and we'll see you on the backside.